Adelaide Vesper kept her mother's broom shop alive on the road corner lot at the edge of the town, and the respectable side of the little valley had decided her brooms were a cheap green-cut broom-corn passed off as good cured brush, and that any decent household would buy its brooms elsewhere, when the truth was that she was only keeping the one honest trade her mother had left her and had never yet wound a broom that cheated a living soul. She did not know yet that before a crooked claim could tear down the broom shop her dead mother had built and hand the corner to a rich man who had long wanted it, a near silent man who built the wagons that crossed the country and had scarcely said 100 words to her, would set his own name against the whole valley to save her. It had begun, the way the hard turns of a life so often do, with a thing she did not choose. Her mother, Ruth Vesper, had built the broom shop board by board and broken the corner ground for broom-corn with her own hands, and had raised Addie in the smell of green brush and cut stalk, teaching her to plant and hackle and scrape and grade and wind the great sewing horse until she could stitch a hearth-broom that swept clean and outlasted 3 of any bundle off the railhead. Then a lung fever took her in 2 short weeks, and because she could work the brush as well as any broom-maker in the territory, Addie went on keeping the shop, the one trade her hands knew, in a valley that had lately found it had no place for her. And the respectable side of the town, the side with the painted storefronts and the new church and the freight boss's wife at the head of it, looked at a young unmarried woman keeping a shop alone on the freight road and working her broom vise at all hours, and decided, well before her morning was decently done, exactly what that made her. The word went round the way such words always do, low and certain and impossible to answer, and it had help, for a man who wanted what she stood on had seen to it that the word had teeth. Here is the thing the town had not troubled to learn. Addie was 26, raised at her mother's elbow by a woman who taught her everything she knew because the work wanted doing, and she had never had the least gift for being ornamental. She kept one thing of her mother's above all the good winders and scraping knives, a small worn boxwood broom needle bound with a wound brass ferrule. The first tool her mother had ever cut for the sewing horse, the long flat needle she had driven through the flat of every hearth-broom for 30 years, so that every good broom carried her stitch. She kept it on the sewing horse and drove it through every broom she wound, and the smooth, worn wood of it in her palm was the one thing in that whole cold, lonely year that still felt like Ruth, and like home. And none of it would matter, because a rich man's hunger for her frontage meant to finish what the gossip had started. The broom trade lived or died by that corner lot. The shop sat where the whole valley's wagons passed and stopped. The one good visible frontage where a broom-maker could be found and her brooms bought. But the biggest freighting and wagon-yard boss in the country, who ran the ox teams that moved the valley's whole crop to the railhead, had lately set his eye on that corner for a great wagon-yard of his own, and when Addie would not sell, she knew, the way anyone who had watched such men knew, that a boss who meant to have a thing did not give it up, and that the good frontage she stood on was exactly what such a man decided he had better own another way. I have been keeping this hearth a long while now, telling the slow stories, the ones where nobody is rescued by luck, but only by the stubborn daily choosing to do the next right thing with whatever hard season you have been handed. And if that is the kind of story that keeps you good company of an evening, then pull your chair up close and stay with me, because Addie is about to learn the thing this whole channel keeps circling back to, that the people a town is quickest to whisper about are so often the very ones with the least to be ashamed of, and that it sometimes takes one silent. Unlikely soul to see a person plain when the whole valley has made up its mind not to. The freight boss was a broad, prosperous man named Cyrus Ballard, who moved the most freight in the country and had a reasonable, regretful way of speaking, and did not come to Addie with threats, but with an offer. He rode down to the corner himself, hat in hand, and told her in his slow, easy voice that it grieved him, that Ruth had been a fine woman. But a broom shop wanted more than a lone hand could give it, and the corner could serve a proper wagon-yard that would bring wages to the whole valley. He would buy the lot at a fair price and take the worry off her hands, and perhaps it was for the best, a freight road corner being no fit place for a young woman to keep late hours alone. He let that last part sit gently in the air, the way such men do, and wished her good day, and Addie stood among her mother's stacked brush with the cold going all the way through her, for she had nowhere to go and no wish on earth to sell the ground her mother had broken and was buried above. The teeth in the town's talk had a name, and the name was Emmett Shaw. 2 years back, before her mother took sick, Emmett had come through as a traveling man buying broom-corn along the line, and had courted Addie honestly enough for one summer, and spoken of a settled life, then moved on down the road without a word. But he had come back that spring, hired now as Cyrus Ballard's yard agent, and finding Addie alone and easy to step on. He had smoothed his own history and served his new master both at once by letting it be understood, in the worried way of a man protecting an honest buyer, that the Vesper brooms were cheap green-cut trash, broom-corn cut before it cured and wound over vermin and rusty wire, and sold as good brush. It was a lie built to cost him nothing and her everything. And it spread through the valley like a grass fire, for a town that would not buy a fallen woman's cheating brooms would hardly grieve to see her cheating shop pulled down off the road. The silent soul who would see her plain through all of it was a widowed wheelwright named Josiah Kerr, the closest-mouthed man ever to set up on that range. He kept the wheel shop and forge across the freight road from her corner and built and mended the wagons up and down the country, slow, careful work that suited a man who could stand a whole day alone over a lathe and a tire fire and not mind it. He had come west building the wagons for the freight lines, and had earned a good timber and forge lot of his own for 5 long years of it. He had lost his wife to a fever their first hard season out, and had not married again, and had got so far out of the habit of company that folk took his silence for sourness. But Josiah Kerr had eyes, and what they had been telling him across 2 years of shoeing wheels within sight of her corner was that the young woman the valley had decided to scorn was the finest hand with broom-corn and winder the territory had, who had carried the shop alone through her mourning and the whispering without once letting the town see her flinch. And he understood 2 things the whole valley would not say aloud: that Cyrus Ballard did not care a straw whether her brooms were honest, but wanted her frontage, and a cleared corner, and a name to hang a cheap taking on, and that Emmett Shaw's green-cut talk was a plain-built lie the town had swallowed because it was easier than being fair to a lone woman. If you've made it this far into Adelaide Vesper's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He came to her at the end of a long day, when the light had gone low across the road and she was carrying an armful of finished brooms out to the rail. He took off his hat and turned it in his big, careful hands, and said the longest thing he had said to anyone in years. He knew it was not his place, but he had seen how Ballard had set his eye on the corner and heard what Shaw was saying, and it was not right. A thing she had not done, costing her the shop and the good name she had kept clean. And there was one way to slow them, if she could stand it. A landholding married householder had standing before the land office and the county board that a lone woman keeping a shop did not, and a man's name beside hers was far harder for a freight boss to buy off or shout down, and the moment she was a respectable married woman, Shaw's whole ugly whisper had nothing left to stand on. If she would let him marry her, plain and quiet, he could buy her the time the valley meant to deny her, and the talk would lose its teeth. He would sleep in his own bunk at his forge and ask nothing she did not freely give. She would keep her broom shop, her corner, and her own self entire. He made the whole speech to the brim of his hat, for he could not have made it any other way. Addie did not answer that night. She lay awake over the cold shop and turned it over, for a marriage on paper to a near stranger was a hard, strange bargain. But she understood what he had truly offered, which was not himself but her own good name and livelihood handed back to her, the very things the boss and the liar had set out to take, and he had offered it without once making her feel small, as a plain matter of what was right. In the morning she set the sewing horse and cut the day's brush and found the shop still hers, and when Josiah came across the road she told him, steady, that she would take his name and be grateful, and the corner of his mouth moved, which on him was very nearly a smile. They were married 4 days later by the town's circuit preacher in the little parlor of Ida and Barnabas Toole, who kept the general store on the road above, and stood as witnesses. There was no ring and no kiss. Because that was not what this was, Josiah said the words low, looking at his own hands, and Addie said hers, looking at the window where the last of the light came down over the corner. That evening Addie slept over her own cold broom shop, a married woman, and Josiah slept in the bunk by his forge, a married man, the little boxwood needle dry on the sewing horse, and neither yet knew what they had begun. The hard turn of that summer was the slow making of them. There was nowhere much to be but at the work, his forge and her winder across the one road. And though Josiah kept faithfully to his own bunk, a paper marriage has a way of leaking into the daylight whether two people will it or not. He rehung the shop door when the old jamb sagged, set new iron on the broom vise so it held fast through the tightest winding, and built her a sound-level drying rack, all without being asked and mostly without a word. And she saw all of it, saw that the silent man did for her in the only language he had, and began, without quite deciding to do for him in return. She kept a plate warm on the stove for whatever hour he banked his fire, mended the coat he wore to the meeting-house, and learned the sound of his hammer on the anvil the way you learn a clock. And the talk between them, between two people who had married to stop the town's talk, came slow and then easier, the way a cold room warms when the fire is lit. She found he was not silent because he had nothing to say, but because he had spent years with no one worth saying it to, and if she did not press him, the words came low, dry, and once in a while very nearly funny. He told her, a little at a time, about the wife he had lost on the trail and the home place he had meant to raise for her and never had, and Addie did not try to fix any of it, only let him set it down where another soul could see it. And she found herself telling him things she had told no one, and the broom shop had stopped being a place she merely endured. They both felt the change and were half afraid of it, for a thing built to buy a little time had no business taking root. It was the wheels that opened the way through, and old Barnabas Tull who let the last of it slip. The claim against the corner grew louder by the week. The sworn statement that her shop and shed stood over the section line and encroached on the road allowance set so plain no lone woman could answer it, and Addie braced herself to lose the shop her mother had raised, and to have no team of her own to haul so much as a broom away, for she had always hired Ballard's freighters. And Ballard's freighters would haul for her no more. And then, one gray morning, she went out to the lean to behind the forge and found her mother's old freight wagon, that had stood these 2 years on rotten felloes and cracked spokes, up on blocks and made whole, 4 wheels turned and spoked, and iron-tired new, the hubs sound and the boxes greased, plainly the labor of many quiet nights. It was a wagon she could load her own brush and brooms onto and haul to any market and never depend on the boss's teams again. and she knew whose hands. She had half heard him more than once in the small hours, a lathe turning and a tire iron ringing in the forge across the road, and had told herself it was only a late job come in. She said nothing to Josiah of the wheels. But the next morning, careful, she asked Barnabas Toole whether Josiah still meant to file on his own timber and forge lot come the fall. The patent he had crossed the whole country to earn, and the old storeman, not knowing he was telling her anything, said no, that it beat him, that Josiah had signed the lot over to another man that very spring and put the money God knew where, and that a man did not build wagons 5 years to earn a piece of ground and then hand it off for no reason. Addie stood a long moment in the bright doorway after Barnabas had gone back into the store, and something began to come clear that she was almost afraid to look at. That afternoon she went quietly to the county courthouse and asked to see the deed entries on the road corner lot and the frontage below her shop. And there it was in the book. The disputed corner and the adjoining frontage parcel the boss meant to have had both been quietly bought up that spring by a private party, patented clear and paid current so no encroachment order could touch them, and the party who had signed away a hard-earned timber and forge patent to pay for it was Josiah Kerr. She walked back down to the corner with her ears ringing and understood the whole of it at last. The quiet man had not merely lent her his name. He had taken the timber and forge lot that was the whole reason he had crossed the country and signed it away to buy up the disputed corner and the frontage parcel so the shop could never be pulled down from under her and her ground could never be seized, and had rebuilt her a whole freight rig through the dark besides, and had done all of it silently. So she would never see it or feel she owed him. Addie, who had been taught too young to ask a thing of anybody, felt something she had shut away since the cold weeks her mother died come loose in her chest. That evening, when Josiah crossed the road from his cooling forge, she took the first fine broom off the sewing horse, stitched through with her mother's needle, and laid it into his hands, and let her fingers rest against his a moment longer than she ever had, and did not draw them back, and he looked down at her hands and then up at her face and did not say one word, and everything was said. But the green-cut talk was still abroad, and Addie found she was not content to let it stand. Josiah had bought her the corner and the frontage while letting the town go on believing Emmett Shaw's lie, and that she would not have. The shop could be saved with a clear deed, but her name could not, and her name she meant to win back herself with the one trade that was truly hers. So she sent to the Territorial Land Office to have the county board sit and hear the boundary claim in the open. And she went back through her mother's careful records and her own until she had what she needed, and sent word up and down the valley that when the board came she would answer the charge against her brooms and her shop in the open before anyone who cared to come. For here was the thing Emmett Shaw had forgotten. Her mother had been a careful, honest broom-maker, and every crop she grew, and every bundle she bought, and every broom she sold she had put down in a book, plain and dated, and Addie had kept it up after her. Between the crop book and broom record, her own dated ledger of sales, the dated receipts for every load of cured brush bought off the valley's own growers, and the record of the old boundary stone her mother had set, she had the whole truth of it in black and white, and the truth did not favor the man who had lied. The morning came, and half the valley gathered on the corner below the road to see the cheat woman answer for herself, with Emmett Shaw come along in his good coat and Cyrus Ballard on his fine horse at the back to watch the finish. And they found they had walked into the wrong morning. Addie stood by her scraping shed with her finished brooms ranged upright on a scrubbed rail before her, and she did not make a speech. She stood aside while the county board and a broom inspector from the Capitol drew brush from every broom and pronounced each one good cured brush wound clean and true, not one green cut or vermin-touched broom among them, and the wire sound and honest in every one. Then she opened her mother's crop-book and broom record on the rail and let the men who could read come and read the dates, and laid the dated brush receipts beside them, the proof that every pound of her brush had been grown on her own ground or bought, cured off the valley's own growers, and never once been green, and that not one soul the talk had named had ever bought a broom from her. And then, plain and quiet, she had the county surveyor dig at the old corner where her mother's record said the true stone lay. And there it was, the buried boundary monument, sound exactly where it belonged, proving the encroachment had been sworn on a line that never ran where the claim said, and that her shop stood square on her own lawful ground. There was no cruel word in it. She only stood beside her own honest work, and let the valley read the dates and the true stone in the ground, and watch the color drain out of Emmett Shaw's face, and understand at last which of them had been telling the truth all along. And before the murmuring had died, Josiah Kerr stepped up beside her and said, low but plain, that the corner lot and the frontage parcel below were hers and clear, bought and patented and held current months since, and no man's claim could lawfully touch her ground. And the county clerk was sent for and confirmed every word. Cyrus Ballard sat his fine horse a moment, with his face gone stiff, having reached for a good road corner that was never his to take, and a scapegoat that would not hold, and then turned it and rode back up the road, and Emmett Shaw was gone from the county not long after. There was no shouting and no triumph in it. The people simply saw, in plain daylight, what they had been too quick and too unfair to see before, and a good many of the respectable wives found they had somewhere else to look. The board threw out the false claim that same week, and Addie kept her mother's shop free and clear on the ground she loved. Josiah Kerr had stood at her shoulder through the whole of it with his hat in his hands. And when it was over he did the thing he had never done, and turned to face her plainly where any who cared to could see. He did not make a speech. That was not his way. He only said low, but not so low that Ida Toll, a step away, could not hear and later gladly tell it, that he had told her in the spring he would go his own road once she was safe, and that he had found he was a liar, because he had no wish to go any road that did not have her on it, and that if she would have him for true, he would count it the great good fortune of his life. And Addie looked at the silent man who had spent his one dream on her and bought her corner safe through the dark and never let her see it, and did not make him ask her twice. They were married again in the early fall, for true this time, in the little church that had lowered its voice about her only a season before, with the Tulls and half the valley crowded into the pews, and a few of the respectable wives near the front looking a shade ashamed, as well they might. The circuit preacher said the words right at last, the clean fall light coming down through the glass. And that evening, after the last of the guests had gone, Addie set her mother's little boxwood broom needle on the mantel of the road corner house Josiah had begun to raise for them, where the low gold light came across it, the needle her mother had begun a life's honest work with, that had stitched good brooms through a whole cold, lonely year, and had earned its place at that wedding as much as anyone there. She had come into that hard year a broom-maker's heir with a shop they meant to tear down and a name a stranger had poisoned, certain the best of her life lay buried in the cold ground above the corner. She grew old on that ground instead, beside the quiet man who put his name beside hers when no one else would. And the good hearth-brooms of that whole valley came off her sewing horse for 40 years, stitched every one with the needle, and the wives who had once lowered their voices about her brought their households to her door. The old boxwood needle sat on the mantel still by then, worn dearer than ever, beside the true boundary stone Josiah had reset to mark their own good ground, the old needle and the good square corner catching the low gold light together. A name, it turns out, is the smallest part of what a person is worth, and the cruelest thing a town can do is decide who you are before it is troubled to know you. So here is what I will leave you with tonight, friend. Before the lamp burns low, when the world has believed a lie about you and reached for the one thing you have kept alive with your own 2 hands. Do you let their whispering and your own pride drive you off your ground, or do you trust the right soul to see the whole of you in the hard season and stand beside you in the easy one? Tell me which one you would have chosen, and pull your chair up to the hearth again soon.